Thank you so much. I can see also a little bit of churn over the beers, but still people here in the room, so quite impressed with that on a night like this. So warm and nice. So I'm Christian, I'm a co-founder of Templafy, and I'm planning to tell you a little bit about what we do with our incentive structure and a little bit on the culture side as well. Hopefully that will be helpful. If you have questions, again, put them in to the link, and happy to answer anything following down that road. First of all, though, my first advice: never miss a chance to pitch your business. So I'll do that as well and tell you a little bit about what we do. I will only spend like 1 minute or two maybe, but I thought it could be interesting as well. At least I think so. So what we do at Templafy, just to put some context, is that we, as it says here, are in the business of streamlining document production for enterprises. So yes, perhaps the most sexy business you can think of in the world. At least that's what we hear all the time. Not really, but that's what we do. So we cater for the very generic scenario that everybody in enterprise are producing tons of documents, presentations, and emails, and spreadsheets, and price quotes, and contracts, and so on every day. And no one ever uses the latest standards, so that's what we take care of. Automate compliance, boost productivity or efficiency. That's pretty much what we do. Product looks like this, popping into wherever you work, so PowerPoint, Google, whatever you create your documents, we're pretty close to the user, bringing everything very close to them. And it is a real problem just because there's more than 500 billion office documents being created every year, and those are the ones that we try to put into some context. So again, putting some control to the non-controlled parts. You wouldn't typically launch a website unless you're pretty sure what's on it, but even with very large companies like Deloitte or UBS, some of the customers we work with, they still have a very small group that actually take care of this, so 5 people would take care of what goes on the website. But when it comes to all the documents, presentations, and emails, it's in the hands of the users, and they're basically hoping everything is correct. So those millions of documents we try to include over there so people work well with that. So that's that story. Now to the important part. Hopefully you'll remember Templafy forever. So about the business, founded in 2014, up until now, raised around $40 million, 160 people in 4 countries, 2 acquisitions, adding to that group as well, and about 35 nationalities in the business. So for this particular thing, I thought this was interesting for 2 areas. So obviously growing through this, I can imagine that that's probably a little bit bigger than some of the businesses that you're doing right now. Maybe some are bigger than that. But at least when it gets to this stage, that is where both of these things actually play a really, really big role. They do it all the time, as the other presenters have done, but certainly they continue to do so, I can tell you that for sure, which is also why it's so important to do things right from the get-go. So think about this immediately, but I can tell you for sure when you have these metrics around this, it becomes an interesting process to keep your culture intact for sure, and it's also an area where you really you can see some huge impact on how you set up your incentive structure. All right, culture first, a couple of words on that. I'm not an expert at all in culture, so I don't have any background basically on it, so this is just my opinion. But what I think is that our culture really wasn't built. It was there from day one. You can transfer that into DNA maybe, but that's really how we see it. We didn't do anything to build it. However, what we did was that we put a lot of emphasis on understanding what it actually was and what it meant to our business, and essentially why the people that we hired fell in love with what we did and what we also did wrong so we could get on the right track. That was really important because we used this, as it says here, to build some future-proof structures around the culture so that when we grew, that we would have a good opportunity to continue to have the same path on the culture. So I would say actually the DNA that we had from the get-go of just being 2 people is the same. We really try to enforce that as much as we can. So around this, these are just some examples, some of the words around this that are important for us: transparency, ambitious, transparent, ambitious, fun, diverse, empowering, humble, creative, as some of them that are super important. And we try to use those as a benchmark to whatever we do as we grow the company. Because for sure, it's a big difference being, 2 people in one table in a rented office, and then of course being 160 people in multiple countries. And especially if you think forward, planning to be much more also in the future. So, a couple of examples what that how the implication happened, why it's important to think about the culture and which infrastructure you should put around the culture for the get-go. This one is one example, the meetings that we hold, for example. That, of course, used to be, like I can imagine any one of you, something that goes on in a room. Because that's where you can actually have this. That's where you're transparent, for example. You can use that a lot to make sure that people are together, you look each other in the eyes, that's really good. And then all of a sudden, that's just not possible anymore. But then you can think about how to get as close as possible to actually replicate that scenario. And that's why we went from this everyone in the same room to everyone in the same Zoom. So essentially what we did at some point was that we transferred our meetings, even the meetings in the office here in Copenhagen. Most of them are conducted in Zoom, just because we want to make sure that people interact with each other in the same way. So it doesn't really matter if you're in New York, if you're in Copenhagen, if you're in Berlin, if you're in Eindhoven, wherever you are, you're actually sort of in the same situation. And we do this just earlier today also with our all-hands meetings that we do every Thursday. Everybody is on that call, everybody's in the meeting, and everybody is just by the computer. Not 10 people in one room, then looking at a shared screen, but everybody at their own screen. And the reason is that we want to give the same situation for everyone to endorse this culture. And I can just tell you, it works tremendously well. Also, it has a lot of other benefits, like much more effective meetings and other stuff. But that's just an example. I think I have a couple of others. Yes, the other one is like pretty close to this one. So obviously from the get-go, connect in person. That was really important for us, and actually still is. So on the onboarding, what we like to do there is we make sure that everybody we onboard still goes close to the core. Everybody's flown in to Copenhagen to stay here for at least 2 weeks during the onboarding process. And I have representatives from the investors in the room. So yes, it's expensive, but it's definitely worthwhile. I can tell you that. However, what we do then on the other side of that is that once you've had that connection and understand people well, looked each other in the eyes, it just becomes a lot easier to perform your work on a remote level. And that's why we use then the collaborative tools that you can do online to work better together and to try to emphasize the culture that we like to see and make sure that that is really something that is carried out to the different offices that we're on. Christmas parties, I think that's the last example. Of course, started back then in my kitchen, so we were like 5 people drinking beer in the kitchen. Then it went to where we are now, everyone in the Copenhagen office, so we flew everyone in again, sorry for that, but really expensive. And I don't think how long, we cannot carry on with that one for a long time still, because it becomes too much logistics around it. It's incredibly valuable. Everybody loves it like crazy, but we need to find other structures around it. So what we're envisioning is that we're actually trying to do something where we have the same party at the same time, but at the different locations, and also with real-time interactions moving forward. So how can we best support this? So in New York, they have the party at the same time as us. Yes, it's weird because it's much earlier, but you know, it's a lunch. So actually, there's a lunch, and here's more like a dinner. And while we do that, we actually have some interaction with them. Yes, it's far-fetched, but it's one of the means you can do to try to keep close to your culture and make sure it's carried in. And again, I can tell you, everybody really loves it. Good, that was on that one. Warrants, do they work? In our opinion, yes. I definitely think warrants work. But I also think it's because we definitely, as a business, are just highly, highly, highly dependent on top talent. That is one. I guess everybody could say the same, but we are for sure, because we have so high growth expectations and we're growing so fast, we cannot do that without super, super high talent, and we cannot attract those if we don't have warrants. That is one. The other thing, I think, that's the reason this works for us, is because we can really promote or document a very lucrative upside to this. So this is something we can actually show for, and the number here is actually all the warrants that we send out up until now. Is the accumulated value increase of the warrants that we've allocated to our employees up until now. That actually adds up to an additional value of 50 million, so it's tangible. And we can of course use that to show the employees it looks like it's a pretty good idea to be in this, because there's a good chance you'll be in the money and not underwater, as Mattias said before. All right, the other reason that I think we really like warrants is because it's definitely, already at the stage you are with your business now, it's probably already a bumpy ride. I can tell you, ours have been. and continue to be all the time. Every quarter it feels like, I don't know if it goes up and down. But what we like about warrants is that it's great fuel during the good times because you feel you're on a ride, also from a financial part. You're really going on a journey that can be also interesting for you. I think a lot of employees, I'll get back to this, are really driven by that. Not necessarily everyone, but the ones that are, that's super strong. The other thing is that it also works as a pretty tremendous glue during the tough times. Not so much in terms of where the business is going, but if you as a person are feeling, well, I'm just unsure if this is the right thing, I have feeling a little bit down, I might have been in the right role, can I get in the right direction? Your incentive structure around warrants, that we had some explanations about it before, warrants is something you typically earn over time. Plus, if you leave the company as a bad leaver, explained before, which means you just quit your job and go away basically, you also lose those potential shares that you would be able to buy at a very low price further on. That's the whole concept of warrants. So to be honest, that's a big thing, you know? People don't want to lose what they earned up there, so they give it an extra thought. Should I really be here? And you know, I like to say that has nothing to do with us not losing a lot of employees, but I wouldn't, you know, there's a chance. Anyway, that's two of the reasons that we really like this. So warrants on our side has been actually an instrument almost since day one. So I think we were in a very similar position as you guys, actually. In 2014 when we launched the company, and I had absolutely no clue about anything, not warrants and pretty much anything. So there was a lot of things on the table, and we were discussing with, I think, very talented people and super good advisors about how to structure things. And one of the advices we had back then was to start developing a warrant program at a very early stage. So we actually did spend quite a, you know, at least at the time, very significant money to make sure that was really, really done right. So it's one of the things, like everything else I think in a startup, if you have the opportunity, make sure you do it right. Warrants, you don't do it on your own. You ask a lawyer, period. That's just one of the cases, because you can land in situations where just things you didn't think of. All of a sudden, you know, you have a problem even of getting, you know, selling the company because you have all sorts of issues down the road that you cannot think of now. That is one of the areas that's just incredibly important. Think about that. Anyway, from that point in time, we've really continuously, you know, allocated warrants to the employees throughout that time, and we've also increased the warrant pool. So one thing that is, I think, also important is that when you get to the stage where you go through funding rounds and take in additional capital and so on, think about how you can position this to your investors. That when you do this, there should also be room for additional warrants. Because there were some examples of people that would, you know, earn all their warrants, or vest them as it's called, over, like, let's say a 2 or 3 year period, and then afterwards they had them. What then? What's the next incentive for them? Sometimes for those guys, you want to make sure that you have additions. It might be still the right people, so you want to make sure you have additional warrants for them, potentially. Or you just meet new people down the road that also needs warrants. So, of course you have to be wary about it. If you have a certain pool of warrants, which is typically the case, you can only give out so many, and then it's done. That's why you should think about making sure that that's something you structure around. You have a certain pool, you give them to the right people for the right reasons, but you also think about, this is something I can potentially grow in my capital raise rounds. I think that's enough technique maybe for that. Yeah, so our ambition for this is to have at least 10% of the share capital allocated in warrants at any point in time, for the same reasons that I just mentioned. We constantly need new talent, and it gets more and more expensive, like nuts. There was a really good point that Nicolaj said, that when you're a startup, or a very early startup, it's like joining a company for lots of reasons, the culture, and you get much less salary, and you want to be part of the journey. As you grow, of course, you'll see different types of people. You need different types of people that just come at a higher cost. You cannot attract the same people anymore, and that's where warrants really come in. So you can actually get them on board and they're part of the journey without their salaries being ridiculous. So that's why I think it's important to do it like this. All right. So these are a couple of areas where I think our warrant policy, how we set up, has been important, actually key.
Number one, as I said a couple of times, to attract top talent. And it seems like, especially the higher, again, it's really not for everyone, but especially for, I think, management and people in sort of those types of roles, there seems to be a tendency that long-term upside is easily beats salary. So they would rather be part of something they believe in that could go crazy with a big return than have a salary, because they could get that anywhere, pretty much, of those types of talents. The other one is to recognize the commitment of key individuals and teams. That's actually something that's super strong for us. We've done very large pools of warrant rollouts to large groups of people, so that everyone actually got some, because we wanted to recognize them. Becomes difficult to do that over time, but we did that in the past. And what we've seen there is that the recognition and upside typically beats salary. And this is also where we definitely went wrong, and we thought, that's amazing. We have now warrants, and it's almost like a gift, because we can see that this is what you can buy them at, and this is the expected value right now of the company. Well, don't you love it? And we found out that a lot of the employees we went to with that story, first of all, that was not what drove them, which is then not too good to actually give away equity, or potentially do. And also, they did not necessarily understand it. So I spoke with our CFO earlier today, and he also, at the point, I think it was him, hopefully there's not one in this room. There was one that I spoke with earlier today that said, you have to, if you allocate warrants to your employees, you have to also take the time to make sure they understand it. And that's basically 45 minutes, an hour with each individual, so they understand what this means for them. And when they do, it's amazing. Some of the employees we have that came in at a small warrant pool, but got it. Still, speaking to one earlier today as well during lunch, and she said, well, how's it going exactly? What's the latest valuation of the company? Was there any shares sold? And then she connects that to what she has. Oh my God, that's 70,000 that I can now sort of look at as my money potentially. Then of course it works because it's motivating, but there's a big risk that people don't get it. So you have to put some emphasis into making sure that that's not the case. Then, for sure, the de-risking of the investment in talent. So they're pretty much connected. But it's also, of course, something that can lower your operational costs, just because salaries are, lower if you add warrants to the pool, and essentially put some risk, to be honest, on the employee end as well, but also some upside. Not everyone is triggered by this. And the final one that I would pull up here is the alignment with key employees. So everybody's chasing the same goal, and we're in this for the long haul together. And that's also pretty strong, especially on the upper levels of the business as you start growing. Good. I was asked, can you tell some bad stories about warrants? Nicolaj said, we want to hear the things that don't work really well. And I think there's, what I just mentioned before, just one that stands out. And the reason I think there's just one, because I've made so many mistakes in the past that I cannot list them, on a computer almost. So, but for this one, I think we knew we had to go do this the right way. So the reason we don't have had a lot of bad experiences is because we actually did it right the first time, getting the deal right, and then introducing it right to the company. But we did go wrong once, as I said here. So we went out with a large and wide allocation of warrants, but we under-communicated it. We didn't communicate well enough. We didn't spend an hour with every employee to explain what this meant. So it's super flat, coming in there like, this is the biggest news ever, and just completely flat. Nobody's even reacting. Don't get it. That's where you don't want to be. Then it's a waste of equity, potentially, if people stay in the company. And the fun fact actually, on that particular part, that's actually worth 6 million on that particular allocation in value increase of those money. But we didn't communicate that was even an opportunity. So nobody got it. That's stupid. All right, so the key takeaways, I think, on the culture, whoa, that's a lot of read, but understand the key values of the culture as early as possible and continue to benchmark those as you grow your work. I think it's really important to you build out that and think about what works well in our culture. And if we acquire new employees, or if we acquire new technology, make sure that it works well with that so you can continue to have this. Because if you lose your DNA in the business, I think you're in a wrong place. So try not to do that. On the warrant side, use an advisor, get started as early as possible. Again, as I said, think allocation of shares for warrants into every funding so that your investors are also part of that journey. They should also pay for the new warrants when you acquire new customers, not just yourself. Sorry about that, Anne-Katrine, if you're still here. Making sure that warrants are the better alternative to incentivize employees. And what I mean by that is that that's not necessarily the best way. It could easily be that some of your employees are actually much better incentivized by having, if it's financial, then potentially bonuses, maybe it's a company trip, maybe it's something completely different. And that is, of course, something you should look for your culture to figure out what actually works here. And there I've seen a lot of examples of companies throwing out warrants and figuring out it's not going to do anything for them. It's just a waste of time and money. I think that's it.
So now